Most of us know that the war in Ukraine, often fought trench by trench, sometimes hand to hand, is brutal, visceral and terrifying. Tonight, Emma Murphy has a shocking account of what that looks and sounds and feels like as the men of one particular trench fight for their lives as the Russians close in. It really is a startling account of what it is like to have to fight for your life day after day. Also on News at 10 tonight. Inflation remains stubbornly, worryingly high. So how far will interest rates rise and for how long? Joel will try to provide some answers. 12 hours of oxygen left as time and hope begin to run out for the crew of the stricken sub, despite the sound of underwater banging heard overnight. Yes, they were treated shamefully, the Home Secretary says, of the Windrush generation, but why have so few received compensation? And bought by members of the Working Men's Club, trained on the golden sands of sea houses, why this horse could write itself into the history books at tomorrow's Ascot Gold Cup.
Let's just see what this boy can do, and I will be getting your money on each way. And I can see that now because we've got our bets on.
This is DanTV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. Trench warfare scarred the continent of Europe a century ago and more before Russia invaded Ukraine. It was terrifying in the First World War, and so it is again in Ukraine. This time, we can see it happen in a landscape of evocatively shattered trees, the hell of it visible to the wider world, a benefit, if you can call it that, of modern video technology. In head camera pictures obtained by our team in eastern Ukraine, soldiers of one Ukrainian battalion filmed their unit literally fighting for their lives as they came under intense and deadly Russian assault near Bakhmut. It is a very tough watch, a clear and visceral demonstration of what the young men of Ukraine and Russia are doing day after terrifying day.
He is bound for a place called Dead Man's Trench. It's where the artillery has just struck. They call it Dead Man's Trench because inside are Russians in decay. Senior Lieutenant Oksandr Yavshenko is about to discover that amidst those bodies is the body of his friend who made the walk just a few moments before him. What happened, he asks. The young, stunned soldiers simply stare at where the shell hit and where the 22-year-old soldier's body lies. But this is only the start. The commander begins to shore the defences, and there's another hit.
Лёха, ты як? Лёха.
He's alive, but now they know Russian forces are coming for them. They have to break cover, or their war will be over. This is Alexander. He's a doctor who took an oath to preserve life. Now he's fighting for his own and his men's. A Russian soldier runs towards him and throws a grenade. It misses. Russian paratroopers are advancing from the right and left flanks. Of the 8 Ukrainians, only 4 have seen battle before. They go to grab ammunition from their dead colleague as their supplies run low, but it's already been used. Finally, Ukrainian artillery is in the battle. The drone unit orders the soldiers back to the trench. Somehow, they've held it. They lost 2 of their men in the process.
Тоді командир по радіо
Back at his
каже,
base, Alexander
«Ховайтесь
explains the
в
battle that
бліндаж».
nearly killed them all.
Тому що ось, він кидає гранату. Раз,
Here he
він
is
кинув
throwing a
гранату.
grenade.
Так.
I was
Я був
happy that he
щасливий,
threw
що
it
він
at
кинув
me,
цю гранату
because if
в
he
мене,
had thrown it
тому що
into
якби
the
він
bunker,
кинув її
the
в
guys would have
бліндаж,
died and we
то
would have lost our
загинули
position.
хлопці.
They would have killed us in that bunker. It happened in split second. I saw the enemy and immediately started shooting in that direction. The main task was to attract his attention. He paid attention, threw a grenade. I crouched down, the grenade exploded. I got up and continued to fire where he was.
What the Da Vinci Wolves went through is by no means unique. Old and new fighters are battling like that day and night.
Bullets are whizzing, explosions are going off, but you don't pay attention to it. You're doing your job, and you have your sector, and you have to make sure that the enemy does not get through. Because if they do, they can destroy your group. It lasted about 30 minutes, and usually such attacks last about 10 minutes.
It's not just land that's being fought for, it's the weaponry too. They hide their spoils of war well on the front line and unwrap them like the finest of gifts. This is a tank taken from the Russians. They're proud of what they've seized and know it brings them battlefield advantage. It's one of many, they won't say how many, now part of the Ukrainian armory.
We are excited about the tanks. It was time for me to receive new ones from the Ukrainian government, but I was lucky and got these T-80s. I'm really impressed by it. We are delighted because it's a good tank.
There were at least 8 where we filmed, weapons which days ago were firing on the Ukrainians, now being loaded up to be fired back across the front line. They don't take them from beneath the tree line for long. They don't want to lose what they fought so hard to gain. In moments of levity, the troops speculate that they're getting more tanks from the Russians than they are from the West at the moment. But they know that tanks like this are still on the front line, aiming at them. Yet for all the taking of weaponry, territory is what they really want. The disputed borders, old and new, now fought over day and night, as Ukraine tries to claw back every inch of occupied land. There is no talk of peace here, just the unending sound of war.
And Emma joins us now from Dnipro. Emma, I mean, really astonishing footage there, an astonishing kind of visceral first-hand account of what it is like to fight for your life every day, but only over meters of land. How unusual or usual is this?
It's not unusual, Tom. This is happening all the time here. They are trying to push forward in this counter-offensive, but what they're fighting for are very, very small amounts of territory. One thing that struck me when we were speaking to Alexander, the senior lieutenant today, was a phrase. He said that time flies over a very long time. And when you look at that footage, you realise just how long it must feel, but equally how quick it must go when you're facing that kind of assault. You know, today in London there's a conference where donors are being asked for money to try and help rebuild Ukraine when this war comes to an end. But speaking to the soldiers on the front line, as we have over the past few days, it's quite clear that the future is not something any of them take for granted, and that footage shows you why. At the moment, all they want is to keep on fighting in the hope that there will be a sovereign Ukraine to be rebuilt. And that's why over and over the message that we keep on getting night after night, day after day, is that they need more Western weaponry, they need more Western support. And interestingly, one of the things that came out of this battle is that they want British drones because they feel that they are far more successful on the battlefield. And when you look at what happened there, there's no doubt what a very big role the drones played. But tonight those battles are going on here, and there is no sense that this is going to come to an end at any point soon.
OK, Emma, thank you very much indeed. And tomorrow Emma has a report with the same Ukrainian unit on how they are using robots to fight from the trenches and get the injured away from the front line. OK, back here, any doubt that the Bank of England will put up interest rates again tomorrow evaporated today with the publication of the latest inflation figure. Yet more mortgage pain is on the way. Inflation is simply refusing to fall. In May, it remained stuck at 8.7%, the same as April. No longer can it be said that only outside influences like the war in Ukraine are to blame. This inflation is now homegrown, baked into the British economy and higher wages. It makes it look like the bank hasn't got a grip. It makes the Prime Minister's promise to bring it down to 5% look even harder to fulfil.
Inflation is stubborn, but so is Katie Alston. She's been selling ice creams on the seafront in Bognor for 20 years.
Any sprinkles?
And says she'll press on. She's raised her prices twice since January on the back of higher costs.
Milk, cream, sugar, cones, the price of wheat. The biggest one for us is electricity. The freezers, the fridges, the storage freezers.
And any sign that those costs are starting to ease, that inflation is finally coming down?
Not yet. I'm not seeing it yet.
The headline rate of inflation began to take off 2 years ago, peaking last October at 11%. That's more than 5 times higher than the Bank of England's 2% target. Since then, inflation has fallen, but by less than the bank forecast, and last month it remained lodged at 8.7%. Meanwhile, core inflation, which doesn't include food and energy prices, rose again in May, and services inflation accelerated to a 40-year high. Many economists see this as evidence that wages and prices are moving upwards together. At Butlins in Bognor, they're recruiting. They need chefs, bar staff, lifeguards and cleaners. Across the economy, there are almost as many vacancies as there are people looking for work. The labour market is tight, and that's a problem. The Bank of England is concerned that companies are raising their prices to fund higher pay and to protect their profits. Higher interest rates are designed to restrain this by weakening economic activity. But there is now a risk that it will take a recession, however mild, to bring inflation back under control. Banks and building societies are raising their mortgage rates. The government is paying more to borrow money. The expectation is the Bank of England will hike interest rates again tomorrow and won't stop there.
I think if I was still on the committee, I'd be voting for a 0.5 percentage point increase. If the Bank of England doesn't do what's necessary to squeeze the inflation out of the system, then we could go back to the sort of inflationary chaos that we had in the 1970s.
At the Beechcroft Hotel, a room costs £20 a night more than it did last year. Bookings are coming in slowly, but higher interest rates won't help.
I do worry about sort of this particular summer, and I do worry as to whether or not we're going to be able to maintain for long periods of time sort of the level of employment that we've got at the moment.
Many countries are going through a cost of living crisis, but Britain's currently looks worse. The government has promised to get inflation down to 5% by the end of the year, but in reality it has as much control over inflation as it has over the weather or the tides.
And Joel is no longer beside the seaside, but beside me here in the studio, and that's because we want him to answer some tough questions about what is going to happen to interest rates, which I think is going to have a lot of people very, very worried.
To do that, I think we need to take a step back, Tom. Let's look at what happened. Initially, inflation was driven higher by the supply chain disruption that we saw during the pandemic, then higher still by the surge in energy and food prices after Russia invaded Ukraine. But as those pressures ease or begin to ease in the case of food prices, what we're now seeing is compelling evidence that wage growth is a source of inflation. It's the Bank of England's job to get prices back under control and stable. They are not stable at the moment. Higher interest rates is the blunt tool they're using to do it, squeezing households so they can't spend as much, squeezing businesses so they can't put their prices up, and let's be honest, effectively increasing unemployment to reduce demand for labour. I mean, this is a pretty sorry state to be in. We saw last week a former NPC member told ITV News he compared higher rates to a form of intensive drug therapy. Well, the medicine is taking time to work, as we've seen over the last year or so. It's also having some very nasty side effects. Some homeowners, I'm afraid, are in for a really torrid time. According to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, 1.4 million households will see a fifth of their disposable incomes disappear in the next 18 months as they refinance their mortgages. The under 40s living in the south of England will be the hardest hit because they've got the biggest borrowings. If the markets are right, the Bank of England will raise interest rates by 0.25% tomorrow, and that interest rates will be close to 6% by the end of the year. That is not inevitable. We know that energy bills are going to come down from July. It is possible that inflation will start falling with more velocity than it is currently. But at the moment, things look really grim.
OK, Joel, I'm sure one day we will have better tidings, but for now, that was very clear. Thank you. Well, let's just put all that to Robert, who is on the set of his Peston programme tonight. Look, Robert, Rishi Sunak's no fool. He was Chancellor of the Exchequer. He made a clear promise about inflation. It's starting to look very hard to keep. What do you make of it all?
Well, it was a very odd promise because, as Joel pointed out, it's very, very hard to control inflation, and it's pretty much impossible if you are the Prime Minister, because what he said is that it's all down to the Bank of England. Now, we're expecting the Bank of England to raise interest rates by 0.5% tomorrow. But the thing that's really frightening, OK, is that interest rates have gone up already 4%. Incredibly fast in something like 16 months. That's rapid by any standards, and inflation in an underlying sense is still rising because, as Joel pointed out, workers have been demanding more pay, understandably, because of the squeeze on their living standards, and that is fueling inflation. And actually, we're in this really appalling situation where, even though pay is going up, it's still not going up as fast as inflation, but the Bank of England thinks that pay that's below inflation is too fast. And it's why most economists now believe that what we will see in order to get inflation down is a recession. Joel says people hope for a mild recession. Interestingly, today we had Norman Lamont, ex-Chancellor of the Exchequer, saying, well, it's not the end of the world if it's a mild recession. But we can't be certain it's going to be a mild recession. It might be really quite a significant recession. And the thing, I mean, I've got Mark Harper on my show, who's a cabinet minister. I had Ed Miliband on my show, who's, senior within the Labour Party. Both of them talk about the responsibility of the Bank of England for dealing with this. But that seems to many people to be totally inadequate, because if essentially the one tool is interest rates, tips us into this terrible recession, I mean, the question is, why aren't there other tools available to the government? I don't think this is a debate that's going to go away. And at the moment, I think it's very bad news for Rishi Sunak and very bad for us. OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. A hospital in northwest London went into lockdown for more than 2 hours today for patients and visitors when a man with a pickaxe ran through the building chasing 2 other men. Armed police were called to Central Middlesex Hospital when the two were attacked. One was left with life-threatening injuries, as was the suspected attacker himself. Police believe his were self-inflicted. They arrested him and decided it was not a terrorist attack. Time, hope and oxygen are all now in short supply in the search for the tourist submarine that went missing near the wreck of the Titanic on Sunday. With only 12 hours of oxygen left, more help is on the way. Efforts have been concentrated where underwater banging was detected overnight. A deep-diving robot craft is arriving in the next 2 hours.
From first light, new vessels were deployed. An expanding armada of ships and equipment to aid the search. This time with renewed hope for a bleak mission on the high seas. A rescue being helped too from the skies. Planes heading for this site, where noises were detected by sonar 900 miles east from Cape Cod.
There have been multiple reports of noises, and every one of those noises is being analyzed. The ocean is a very complex place. Obviously, human sounds, nature sounds, and it's very difficult to discern what the source of those noises are at times.
For the Coast Guard and the Navy, it is a race against the clock to determine the origin of those sounds and if indeed they're coming from the missing submersible, while all the time oxygen levels inside it are dropping.
66.5%.
This video was taken on the Titan last year.
We got a surface.
High spirits among that crew on the same mission in waters 2.5 miles deep. But there have been concerns about exploring those depths in this vessel for years. Chris Brown should have been on board this trip with his friend British businessman Hamish Harding. He went, Chris chose not to.
I think most explorers assess the risks before deciding to go on an expedition. It's been quite a few years that they'll have been planning this expedition. They'll have looked at the risks and decided those were risks that they wanted to take.
We run the whole thing with this game controller.
Come on! Safety fears over the craft and its parts have been alluded to in the US media before. They were also raised by official maritime organisations back in 2018.
This could probably have been prevented if some of our regular certification procedures had been followed. In the end, it is an experimental vehicle. A lot of risk is being taken, and it's a big gamble. And we thought that the risk was too high.
It is an uncertified vehicle in uncharted waters, with time diminishing to save the lives of a father and his son, a British businessman, a French explorer, and the American who owns the vessel. Lucy Watson, News at 10, Boston.
And Neil Connery is in Halifax tonight, the centre of the Canadian rescue operation. Neil, clearly, as we've said many times, but time really is running out now. Can you bring us up to date on the search effort and the role Canada is playing in it?
Absolutely critical hours, Tom, as you say. Canada is playing a crucial role in this international search operation. Everything from the Canadian side is being controlled behind me here at the Joint Rescue Control Centre here in Halifax. These would have been the first people to hear about these banging noises that had been picked up by Canadian aircraft which had deployed their sonar buoys in the waters of the search area. Those banging noises now being assessed by experts in the US as well as Canada to try and see if they can offer some clue, some evidence that helps this search along. Now, while that's going on, the Royal Canadian Navy sent out one of its vessels today, HMCS Glaze Bays. It left port here in Halifax this morning. It should arrive on scene tomorrow. It contains specialist decompression equipment on board. And all the time, the Royal Canadian Air Force in the skies above, searching, scouring this area. But Tom, I think everyone looking at this knows that the challenges here are immense. The chances of this succeeding seem remote, but there is absolutely no shortage of hope and determination here tonight. Everything that can be done is being done.
Well, Neil, thank you. We'll keep everything crossed. If the submarine is stuck on the ocean floor, only a handful of remotely operated vessels in the world can get down that deep, and the first one still hasn't arrived. Martin, our science correspondent, is here to guide us through what is looking like an increasingly improbable rescue. Martin.
Well, Tom, before the rescue can even start, they've still got to find Titan. And just a reminder that it is a vessel about the size of a transit van in a search area 1.5 times the size of Wales. It's also painted white, which makes it even harder to spot. Now, GPS doesn't work underwater, but if the banging sounds are coming from Titan, that gives the rescuers the chance to narrow the search down using sonar. Sound waves detected by sonar buoys dropped into the ocean can be used to triangulate the vessel's position. Now, there are already 5 ships and 2 robotic submersibles in the ocean near the search site, and there are 5 more ships on their way. The most important is this one, French ship Atalante, now due to arrive in about 2 hours' time. On board that is a remotely controlled vehicle, or ROV, called Victor 6000. That can withstand the pressure on the seabed 3,800 metres underwater, which would crush most submarines. Now, it is pitch black down on the seabed, and Victor can only move at walking pace. But if it finds Titan, it could either free it from whatever may be trapping it on the seabed, allowing it to float to the surface, or attach a rig, enabling it to be winched back up. Now, the US Navy managed to do just that with an F-35 jet like this one in the South China Sea, which had sunk to a similar depth last year. But from crash to retrieval, it took 38 days. And Tom, as everyone's been saying tonight, time is absolutely key. A reminder, it's estimated there are just 12 hours of oxygen left.
OK, Mohsin, we are all clearly praying for a miracle at this point, but thank you very much. Coming up in the programme, and still the Windrush generation waits for compensation 4 years after it was promised. Plus, the seahorse, who lives in sea houses, and his owners gamble that it'll upset racing royalty in tomorrow's Ascot Gold Cup.
The horse doesn't know what price it is, you know, and there was a lot of good favourites beaten yesterday on the first day at Ascot. So, let's see what it is.
Back in a minute with those reports and more. Welcome back. When the wrongs of racism done to many of the Windrush generation were acknowledged and apologies offered, a compensation scheme was set up. That was 5 years ago, yet most of those who've made claims are still waiting. Now, on the 75th anniversary of the Windrush's arrival, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has told us they were treated shamefully, but she didn't apologise for the delay.
Fitzroy Maynard still lives with the pain of a life destroyed by the Windrush scandal. From years of homelessness to a home not fit to live in. A British citizen stripped of his rights and wrongly classed as an illegal immigrant and treated as if he didn't exist.
It made me have to beg. It made me eat people's leftovers. I'm just walking the street. I'm thirsty. I don't know what to do. 2008 to 2009 was the worst time of my life.
The scars of trauma still etched on his face. He says the government scheme to right the wrongs of the past is still failing. Fitzroy has been offered compensation, but he says it barely touches the sides of a life lived on the streets where he was left destitute.
They don't seem like they want to give you the full amount. They say it, they're going to, but they're not.
The first of the Windrush generation arrived in England 75 years ago as British citizens, many from the Caribbean who came over the next few decades to rebuild Britain after the war, only to be later classed as illegal immigrants, which affected generations of families. In 2019, the government began a scheme to compensate them. 4 years on, latest figures show only a quarter of claimants have received payment. Under pressure from criticism of the scheme itself, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, defended it.
Let's talk about the application process, which people say is so complex and so bureaucratic that some people have just simply given up, others aren't even trying, some have died waiting for a decision, while many others have lost jobs, homes, been left destitute, others have been detained and deported. Would you like to take this opportunity to apologise to them?
Well, what I would say is that actually we have simplified the application process. We've made big changes to the claim form, for example, to make it simpler and easier to use.
We showed our interview to Fitzroy.
I think she was wrong and she should have apologized. How long do you need to wait? I cannot wait forever. I've got my daughter to look after.
Lawyers acting for many claimants say the scheme should now be taken out of the Home Office's hands.
And there's a callous disregard for the issues that's been raised by lawyers like myself and community activists and claimants themselves. Then we're not being taken seriously. And I think that's one of the reasons why this is running on and why people like me think institutional racism is at play.
The Home Secretary rejected that and calls for the scheme to be removed from her department.
I feel this issue very keenly, very personally, very powerfully in my heart, and I've really wanted to work closely with members of the working group so that we do right the wrongs.
For Fitzroy, the anguish of the past still looms large, as he waits for the justice he believes he deserves. Sejal Karia, News at 10.
The left bank of Paris was rocked by a big explosion this afternoon, injuring nearly 20 people and sending smoke billowing across that famous Parisian skyline. A gas leak in a private school was the most likely cause. The American Academy in Paris is in the 5th arrondissement, east of the Garden of Luxembourg. Early arrivers at this year's Glastonbury Festival were treated to a traditional summer soaking as they pitched their tents just for a change. Before that, they were welcomed by Emily Eavis, the organiser and daughter of the festival's founder, Michael Eavis. The rain, though, wasn't the kindest of starts. Actually, the forecast for the rest of the week isn't too bad. Finally, the picturesque fishing village of Sea Houses in Northumberland may be basking in more than just the early blast of summer sunshine by tomorrow. It could be immortalised in racing folklore as the home of an Ascot Gold Cup winner. A horse bought for a few £1,000s by 6 members of the local working men's club, which does its training on the miles of golden sand overlooked by a 1,000-year-old castle, is a serious contender for tomorrow's big race.
Hundreds of miles away from the royal enclosure at Ascot, on a beach in Northumberland, Wise Eagle is splashing through the waves. A stone's throw from the working men's club where the idea was dreamt up by builders, a bookie and a pub manager.
Come on, the Eagle!
Multi-millionaires will be making their way to Ascot from across the world.
There'll be sheikhs, billionaires, millionaires and just a bunch of working lads. 6 of us going down.
For these lads, well, they're getting ready for a bit of a laugh on the train down.
Looks like the Fat Controller.
It's working in 10 minutes.
I'm on my break at the minute. I'm not being a minute.
They all chipped in £7,000 in total, which in horse terms is nothing short of a bargain.
The horse doesn't know what price it is, you know, and there was a lot of good favourites beaten yesterday in the first day at Ascot. So, see what it is. It's just a great experience to be there.
Since they bought him out of form a few years ago, the horse has had the freedom of the northeast coast and has thrived from the occasional splash in the sea.
Set up at Musselburgh when he was 9-1. He says, oh, he hasn't got a chance of getting a place, and he went and won. So let's just see what this boy can do, and I will be getting your money on each way. And I can see that now because we've got our bets on.
Bets on, bags packed. They're ready to cheer on their horse at Britain's most prestigious flat meeting tomorrow. Hoping Wise Eagle will turn out to be a very wise investment. Kelly Foran, News at 10.
Come on, that would be a story. And that is it, sadly, though, on the longest day of the year. You probably haven't forgotten that. Good night. Thanks for watching.